The house that I am currently living in has an attic, and I have lived in this house for the past 8 years since I was 13 years old. One night during a bad winter where it was constantly raining and had strong winds, I hear boxes being moved in the attic. I freak out and lay awake the whole night, listening to those weird sounds coming from the attic. In the morning, I confronted my parents, asking if it was them. They both denied it and have no reason to go into the attic. They only go into it around Christmas time because that's where we store the tree, Christmas decorations, and stuff we don't use but don't want to throw away. I told them I heard noises, and both of them brushed me off and claimed I was just hearing things. The next night, I heard the sounds again, and the next night, and the night after that. For the whole week, I told my friends at school, and they said someone must be in my attic. I told them it was impossible. The only way into my attic is by grabbing the ladder from the shed in the garden, coming into the house, and next to the laundry, which was next to my room, there's a hole, like a proper hole. Sorry, I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, with a panel covering it, and that's how you actually get into the attic. Now, after that week, when the weather cleared up and I didn't hear any more noises coming from the attic, I simply forgot about it until I forgot my key one day. I called my dad, who was at work, and asked him if there was a spare key hidden somewhere that I could use to get in. He told me there's a way of getting into the attic via the roof. He told me about a large panel on the roof that could be removed and you could get into the attic. It's also quite easy to get onto the roof, and my younger brother has done this many a times with ease, to rescue our cat or balls that have ended up there. My blood went cold. Someone could have gotten into the attic. Someone could have been in there for a week, and then a dark thought crossed my mind. What if he's still there? I got out of there and walked around the neighborhood for 3 hours instead, while waiting for my dad to come home. When he did, I told him again about that week that I heard noises in the attic and how he could have gotten in. And again, he brushed me off. The next few years were filled with the occasional horror moments. I have 2 glass doors in my room that face the backyard, and we have lights and motion sensors in the garden. One night while I was sleeping, my dog was asleep next to me and my back to the glass doors. My room was suddenly flooded with light. Someone or something was in the garden. Now, I didn't think much of it. Perhaps a stray cat, I thought. Then is when my dog started growling. He's a very sweet and timid dog that our kitten bullies, and I froze. I had never heard him growl before, and that's when I heard a tapping on the glass door. I wanted to cry. I was terrified if whoever was tapping on the glass wanted in, the glass wasn't going to stop him. The tapping continued for a few minutes. I lay still, pretending to be asleep. Then I heard the doorknob being tested, and then my dog started barking, really deep and menacing. Whoever was there had fled once he heard the dog. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, scared he was going to come back. In the morning, my dad yelled at me due to the dog barking and waking him up. I cried and told him about what had happened, and I swear, once again, he brushes me off. Now, another time when we changed the locks because my brother had lost his wallet with his keys in them and our address was in his wallet. It later was found in our mom's house, but my dad gave me a new key for the front door. I put it on my bed and went shopping with my dad and brother. When I came back, it was gone. I searched everywhere. It never turned up, and I ended up taking the spare key my dad had hidden in the garden and pretending it was my main. He would later put another key in the garden, which was hidden under my dog's bed. And this is important for later. Other things have happened, but I think I've given enough backstory, and this was about 2 months ago. So my dad travels for work sometimes, and when he does, my brother stays with our mom and I look after the house and the animals. My dad had been gone for 5 days when this happened. I had left the main computer on and it was just on the Google homepage. I went to bed and woke up 2 hours later, and my stomach was killing me. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up. Now, I had made a bit of a mess, so I went to the kitchen. I have an open-plan kitchen, so it also has a dining room and a small living room in this big room. The main computer room is also in this room. Now I grabbed a mop and a bucket and That's when I saw the computer screen on. Not dark like when you don't touch your computer for a while and the screen goes black. Curious, I went over to look at it and saw it was on YouTube, on a random music search page with the music typed into the search bar. I was incredibly freaked out. I clicked back and it went on a few different music things before going on a website of a university my brother was considering going to, and I had taken him to the opening day only a few weeks ago. And then I clicked back again and it went on my email. I leave it logged in, and then it went to my university homepage. I was beyond freaked out. All I could think was someone was in my house. They had used my computer and gone searching for all this stuff. But why? I quickly grabbed a knife and headed to the main living room, which is next to the front door. I called my best friend, who lived about a 30-minute drive away, and she told me she was coming to pick me up. I searched the living room while on the phone with her, and I told her if I screamed to call the police. After making sure the living room was safe, I paced, waiting for her. My cats were freaked out and were hiding, something they never do. When she arrived, we searched my house. I was violently kicking doors, opening and yelling if someone was in the house that I would stab them. There was no one inside the house. I was still freaked out, and my best friend told me I'd be spending the night with her at her house. I felt bad leaving my animals, but I couldn't bring them due to having her dogs that didn't like cats and could be aggressive with my dog at times. As we were leaving, a thought hit me. What if the person was in the attic? My best friend told me no way we were searching the attic, and she grabbed me. I didn't call the police, and my dad arrived home the next day. I told him what happened last night, and he had laughed at me and once again brushed me off. I do believe there is, or at least was, someone living in my attic. I'm very scared to be left home alone overnight, and I'll update if anything else happens, as I do plan on moving out next year. This summer I traveled alone to Colombia. I stayed with a host family in Cartagena and met a girl from Brazil named Maria, who was also staying there. Maria and I quickly became friends and started doing as many touristy activities as we could during the day and partying all night. One afternoon we were researching day trips for the weekend when we came across the island of San Andreas. We immediately fell in love with its beauty and booked a trip there for Saturday. When we got to San Andreas, everything was great. We swam in the ocean, ate great food, and had an amazing time with the other people in our hostel. While we were exploring the town, we got sucked in by a touring agency and spent all of our money booking tours like parasailing, boating out to the smaller islands, etc. One of the activities we decided to try was scuba diving, despite neither of us having a license. The tour agency said it would be fine because we wouldn't go very deep and a licensed professional would be with us the whole time. So we spoke up early the next morning and got picked up in a van with a driver, a scuba instructor, and a family from Spain. The driver took us to a secluded spot on the island. Now, this was a small island, like super hard to avoid people, but this spot didn't even have any locals. The whole time we were there, maybe 3 cars drove past. Anyway, the instructor, Jose, gave us directions and safety tips in 3 different languages, and then took the family to dive while Maria and I waited for our turn. After they left, Maria turned to me and started telling me that she didn't trust Jose. She told me that while they were speaking in Portuguese, he'd made strange comments about our swimsuits. We were both wearing bikinis and were both young and, I suppose, fairly attractive women. And when she told him that neither of us had boyfriends, he was very insistent that Maria and I must be a couple then. I shrugged it off as a cultural thing and told her it would be fine. Our turn to dive finally rolled around and we hopped in the water with him. Immediately I realized this was more of an intermediate than beginner dive, but it didn't really bother me. I was excited to see the coral and fish. I could tell it made Maria nervous, though, because she wasn't exactly a strong swimmer anyway, and Jose was putting her on edge. At first it was fun. We were swimming, and Jose was taking pictures for us on his GoPro. But then he started grabbing us strangely, touching our breasts and making it seem like it was an accident. Again, I didn't really think anything of it because we were underwater and it was his job to make sure we stayed close to him, but it was enough to freak Maria out and end her dive. Maria got out of the water and I was having a fantastic time and didn't really want to leave just yet, so I stayed with Jose, just the two of us. He took me to a different spot on the reef and we ended up swimming past all the coral into the open ocean. I was really curious on what I would see. At this point, we were probably about 80 feet or 24 meters deep, which is just ridiculous for someone without a diving license. We'd gotten pretty good at nonverbal communication at this point, and it was like I could read his mind. He took some pictures of me with the GoPro in the open water, and I was excited to show my friends what a daredevil I was. After a while, I started to get tired and decided to head back, and that's when he grabbed me. He started gesturing to me, and from what I understood, he was not going to let me leave until I kissed him. Now, Jose was probably around 40 and I was 18 at the time. Plus, I had a boyfriend that Maria didn't know about. But honestly, I really don't need to justify why kissing a complete stranger underwater would gross me out. It was just weird. But I was starting to get this gut feeling that I should go with what he told me, so I laughed and gave him a kiss on the cheek, which he not so sneakily photographed. He looked me in the eyes and shook his head no. I could tell he was starting to get agitated. He took my air away until I kissed him on the mouth, and repeatedly did this until we got everything he wanted, photographing it all. My gut was screaming that the only way this would end was by me being drowned, so I improvised. I pretended to be into it for a while, and then I looked behind him and got the widest eyes. The goal was to make him think I saw a shark or jellyfish. It worked. He turned around and I swam away as fast as I could. Eventually I got to the surface and popped my head up. To my absolute horror, we were super far away from shore. Jose surfaced next to me and in a kind of irritated voice asked me what I saw and insisted it was safe to go back down if I wanted to finish the dive. By some miracle, Maria saw us and started waving. I waved back at her and started swimming that way. I guess Jose knew his plan was messed up once Maria saw me alive. He sighed and headed back with me. On the drive back, I was super quiet and Maria knew something was wrong. I typed out everything that happened and showed it to her and she was furious. We ended up buying the pictures Jose took on the GoPro to try and use them as evidence, but he only sent us the ones from earlier on in the dive. Honestly, it makes me sick thinking of the stuff that he probably uses them for. We tried to contact the police, but they didn't care. Jose is still out there, and I hope whoever dives with him is smarter than I was. So to start out, I've been homeschooled for the majority of my life, and because of that, I didn't have many friends. Finally, when I went to college, I was able to meet so many new people, and I would soon learn that not all of them were as friendly as I had thought. In my first semester, I was enrolled in a college algebra class. I had never enjoyed math a day in my life, but it was something I was accursedly good at. One day, when I was studying for a test, a guy from my class, let's call him Harley, came running around the corner, skidding to a stop in front of my table as he slammed his books down on it. I had always recognized him as the loud, charismatic guy who sat a couple of seats behind me. He frantically asked if I knew what I was doing in the class, and I didn't want to be rude, so I let him sit with me while I showed him how to do certain equations. When I had finished showing him how to do the work, he thanked me and admitted he really didn't know what was happening in the class and that he was currently getting an F. I offered to tutor him after class because I had free time and he happily accepted. This was the new normal for a few weeks and we developed a good friendship. We would often get distracted on topics we enjoyed and we even found out that we both liked the same video games and TV shows. Gradually, we spent more time together and I even introduced Harley to my friend group in my club. My friends were initially a bit wary of him as he had a rather boisterous personality, but they decided not to say anything because he was a friend. Eventually, he asked me out on a date and I said yes. I wasn't really that interested in him, but I had also never been on a date before and figured that the date would help me figure out if I could truly like him. That's when things started to get a little weird. He told everyone about the date, my friends, the club, and even people in his classes that didn't even know me. It almost felt like he was putting a claim on me. Then, the night before the date, Harley FaceTimed me and asked if I would ever consider going out with another guy we both knew. I admitted that I would, and he threw a big fit saying how he felt worthless, like I was playing him. He continued to spout insults at me to the point where I started crying, and then he eventually called off the date. I was left crying on the bathroom floor for the rest of the night, feeling overwhelming guilt. The next day I woke up and discovered a text from him asking if we could talk. I called him and he was already in a good mood, saying that we should put the date back on. I wasn't really sure about it, but he convinced me we would only be going as friends and that I didn't really need to like him for it to work out. The date eventually came, and while it was a fun day, I just felt like I had no interest in him, so I ultimately rejected his affections. He didn't seem too upset and happily said that he'd always wait for me and that he was persistent. More weird occurrences started happening after that. Harley would do something like incessantly start poking me while I was trying to study. He would jab me in the ribs and tell me all sorts of terrible things as I was winning in a friendly argument. He would call me degrading names like woman and slave, and he would yank my hair in public to show off to everyone because I had told him how it never really hurt that much. He would often do this in public settings, causing my friends to give him confused and disgusted glares. He even started pulling my hair when I was trying to order at Starbucks, with the barista trying not to laugh the whole time. I felt so embarrassed that I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Harley also put screenshots of me crying over FaceTime as his lock screen and home screen, and when I would ask him to change it, he explained that I looked pretty when I cried. Because of this, I would always avoid FaceTiming him. My friends and club members continuously warned me about Harley, saying how they didn't like him and that he gave off weird vibes, but I would often deny it, saying that it's just part of his personality. He tried to make an effort to hang out with me more, a notion I wouldn't mind from one of my other friends, but he honestly was starting to creep me out. I explained that I like being in groups more than just one-on-one for the sake of holding a conversation. Really, I just felt uncomfortable being alone with him. Harley agreed that we should both invite friends, but many of mine were never available except on rare occasions, and his all seemed to oddly back out last minute. He would then try to make me pick sides, creating hypothetical scenarios where I either had to choose him or my other friends. Of course, I never chose him because I had really only known him for a couple of months, and would always make him very upset because I was supposed to be his bestie. After all, I was his. His ex eventually started texting me, harassing me about him. She told me to run away as fast as I could because he was crazy, and when I explained that he was my friend, she called me naive and would get really upset. Even though I never wanted to text her, I always dreaded it. I couldn't find it in myself not to respond to her when she texted me late at night. After all, she said she was in a dangerous business, and that she could die any day and that our texts were her only chance to live normally. One night I got a text from her saying she had been busted and that there was no way she was going to live through it. She said she was crying and that her final wish was to make Harley happy in her place because she couldn't. I never received another text, and I spent the entire night crying and trying to figure out how to cope with the fact that someone told me about their death. I eventually told Harley about it, and so he started saving up money to go to Egypt, that's where she was from, to go and find her to make sure she was okay. He then started using this to guilt trip me. If he wanted us to hang out together or do something I didn't want to do, he would tell me that he was going off to Egypt and that it's dangerous, so he might die and never get to do anything else. Most of the time I would give in, but the times I didn't, we would get into heated arguments. He always wanted to pay for my food, and when I refused, because he would always use it against me as a "but remember when I paid for your food that one time" card? He would start arguing with me in front of the cashier and would wrestle with me for the man to take his credit card instead of mine. It got to the point where we would have heated arguments once a month that would cause me to shut down for a couple of days, moping until I had the courage to approach him again and apologize for everything I had done. It was always my fault, and I would keep running back to him. The final straw came sometime in May of my second semester. I had been working on an art piece for over a month and had accidentally deleted it without backing it up. I was so depressed and posted about it, to which he replied with a laughing face saying how that was pretty funny. When I didn't respond, he asked if I was okay and that he was going to call me. I didn't pick up. I didn't feel like talking to him, and I knew that if I did, I would just explode in his face and nothing productive would happen. When I didn't pick up the second time, he started texting me telling me to pick up. I said that I wasn't in the mood and asked him to respect my opinion and boundaries. He responded by saying, "I don't have to obey you," and then called me 3 more times. The next day, I was still in a bad mood, and I could tell that Harley was too. We were sitting in the cafeteria, eating in silence, as he asked me why I didn't pick up the phone. I was about to explain how upset I was when I saw one of my friends from across the cafeteria. I felt so relieved and stood up to greet them when he suddenly grabbed my arm. He looked me straight in the eyes and said that he was warning me not to say hello to them and that I would regret it later. I think that was the first time I was really scared of him, but I didn't let it faze me. I simply pulled my arm out and said straight to his face, "I don't have to obey you." He was in a terrible mood the rest of the day. That night, I got a text from him asking if he did something that was bothering me. I responded by telling him how much of a jerk he had been acting and that I didn't want him to touch me anymore, whether it was jabbing me or pulling my hair, or tell me to stay away from my friends. His only response was, "Well, that isn't an excuse for you to act like that," and then exploded onto me, calling me bossy as well as a plethora of other insults. I decided to close my phone and not use it for the rest of the night as my temper was boiling. In the morning, I pulled my 2 real best friends aside and explained the situation to them as I burst into tears. They comforted me before giving me an awkward look, stating that they wanted to tell me something that they promised they wouldn't reveal unless I had ever given them cause for concern. They then admitted that Harley had been texting them, telling them not to come to events I invited them to, and then instructing them to do it in a way that was last minute so I wouldn't have time to tell anyone else. They then said that whenever I had left the room, Harley would go on and on about how he was my best friend and how we would always spend time together when in actuality we didn't. I came home and had a talk with my parents about the situation. My dad was furious and said that he wouldn't even treat a dog the way Harley had treated me. He then said that he didn't want me anywhere near him, which I completely agreed with, and that if I needed to make up an excuse as to why I couldn't drive Harley anymore, to say that both he and my mom won't allow us to be in the same car anymore. I then broke the news to Harley, saying how I felt tormented by him and that I never wanted to see him again. I told him not to call or text me anymore and that I was breaking our friendship here and now. He begged me to give him one more chance, but was done with it, and I blocked him on Instagram. I wish I could say that that was the end of it, but then it really started to get creepy. I woke up the next morning to see over 15 missed calls and a message explaining that we were friends and that I would call him back if I ever considered him one. I blocked his number. He approached me and my friend in the cafeteria, handing me a ball of crumpled up papers that was an apology note, with the first page being a list of "I'm sorry" and "I promise." I didn't want to hear any of it, so we both left immediately. I had a friend escort me to every class because I was terrified he would try to approach me and plead with me, or that something worse might happen. I canceled a night class we had together as I was terrified that it was located near an empty field undergoing construction with a narrow alleyway being the only way to get to my car. I was even advised to get the campus police involved in case an incident did occur. I never did as I was afraid to get Harley in trouble or for me to seem like I was weak or overreacting. Once he realized he couldn't get a hold of me, he started contacting my friends, telling them to change my mind. He also asked for my parents' contact information as he also wanted to speak with them. He even contacted my small group leader from the church. Thankfully, most of them blocked him immediately. I told my club president that I wasn't going to come for the next few weeks because I knew Harley would be there. I explained that it was a personal issue as I wanted to reduce the number of people who knew about the incident so it didn't explode, but Harley had other plans. Unlike me, he did go to the club that week and had a full-blown meltdown. It was so bad that the president wanted to have a personal meeting with me. I was terrified at the thought of having to explain the situation. I was afraid I would get blamed for it all, but as soon as we met, he started off by explaining that he knew that Harley was in the wrong and wanted to discuss what should be done about him. Nothing official was announced, but it was suggested that Harley should leave the club until he could find some help and a counselor. Harley then began contacting me through other accounts. He used his little brother's account to try and convince me to become his friend again. He contacted me through an account where he called himself Nolan, and even his ex apparently sent me a few texts. He had apparently bailed her out of jail. She wasn't dead. And so I once again had to hear her yell at me for being stupid and how I should be grateful to Harley and that he even wrote a song about me. I eventually lost it and told her to stop contacting me. He then started contacting club members, ranting to them until late at night about how I was the one manipulating him and being bossy towards him and only used him for money. They would then, in turn, call me and I had to explain my side of the story to them. They said that he'd even told him that he knew deep down that I still wanted to be friends with him and that I was just playing hard to get. Harley then would make random appearances at the club, trying to start friendly conversations with people who no longer wanted to talk to him after hearing both sides of the situation. Oftentimes it would end in him being ignored, but that only led him to coming to the club just to stand on the opposite side of the table from me, staring at me for 15 minutes at a time before taking his leave. Sometimes he would come back, claiming he left his backpack in the room. One of the club members even said Harley tried to look under the stalls in the restrooms to find someone he recognized to help him get back into the club. Eventually, the president had to have a stern talk with him and strongly suggest that he would not be welcome if he ever came back. It was at that point that everything seemed to die down. He stopped trying to contact my friends, he stopped using alternate accounts, and I barely saw him on campus. Although there was a lot of stress involved in this situation, it did teach me a valuable lesson of not trusting everyone I met, and I should be more aware when there are signs of possessiveness and manipulation. My message to anyone who finished reading this would be to not be afraid to ask for help when you feel like you're in a bad situation. If my friends and family weren't there for me, who knows what could have happened? I used to talk to a guy online that was kind of shady, but that's why I liked him. He would share his messed up fantasies with me and tell me I'm pretty. Everything a girl needs, right? Well, the fantasies escalated over time to involve me in them. They went from meeting up for dates to getting married so I could have as many babies as possible with him, to him kidnapping me and keeping me in a bunker. I kept talking with him through it all. We had been in touch for nearly 8 years, and I liked that he was scary, but across the country. Those fantasies weren't the only things we talked about, so it was easy to move past them. A few months ago, he found out that I was diagnosed with major depression. He was trying to figure out how I could improve my mental health if I suddenly went off my medication. He stopped when I told him that I hadn't thought about ending my own life in a while because I was finally getting treatment. He was sad that I hadn't told him that I was that way in the first place. Over the holidays, I had my first really bad spiral in 6 months. I won't go into details to save on time, but the super short reason is that I miss my family. I went quiet online for about a week to wallow in my abyss, then pull myself out. When I finally re-emerged, worse for wear and still sad but not considering the pros and cons of dying, I found a lot of messages from this guy telling me not to end my own life, but to let him do it for me. He said I'd enjoy myself. He could use me up until the very end, and I could be his ghost bride in the afterlife. He also sent a lot of gifts of pictures of brutal, hardcore stuff, most of which involved a crying woman being choked by a belt, I told him that I really didn't desire any of that, and he said, "Okay, then let's not do that." Then he proceeded talking like he didn't offer up an extremely painful death because he knew I got the big sad sometimes. That was kind of the last straw for me. I never intended to meet him, but I draw the line at murder fantasies. That's the closest I've ever gotten to know someone who had a plan to do those kinds of things to me. I haven't had many paranormal experiences in my 30 years of life, 3 that I can think of. This particular experience happened to me when I was 13 or 14. One Friday night, I was at my aunt and uncle's house watching my 2 cousins, who were about 9 and 6. My uncle was in a band at the time and was at a point where almost every weekend they were playing shows, so it wasn't unusual for me to babysit their kids one night out of almost every weekend. This weekend, my uncle had a gig in Los Angeles, about 2.5 hours from where we lived. He and my aunt left around 6 p.m. that night and wouldn't be back until well after 4 a.m. I fed the kids, made sure they were bathed and ready for bed, and we settled down together watching TV for a couple of hours. At 10:13 p.m., I tucked them into bed as the eldest was nodding off and her younger sister was already asleep. I remember the time exactly because I looked at the clock above the TV to check the time when I saw my younger cousin was asleep. After I put them to bed, I resumed watching TV by myself. It was a few minutes after I had sat down that I heard my aunt's voice. She said my name, softly. The sound came from behind me in the den area. I muted the TV before I turned around and saw my aunt sitting on the top step of the den. 3 steps led you down into the den from the dining room, which was directly behind where I sat on the couch in the living room. She was only about 75 feet or so away from me. Somehow I wasn't scared, but I was confused. I knew she wasn't due to come home yet, and I hadn't seen or heard her or my uncle arrive at the house. Where I was sitting, I had a clear view of the front door, but I thought maybe she had come home while I was busy tucking the kids in bed. I looked at the front door and it was locked from the inside, just as I locked it when I bid my aunt and uncle goodbye earlier that evening. All of this happened in the matter of a few seconds. She had seen me look at her, we met eyes, and she was as real and clear as I was. She said my name again and told me it was time to go to bed since it was late. This time I protested. I was, and still am, a night owl, and in my early teen years I often wouldn't go to bed until 1 or 2 a.m., most Friday and Saturday nights. "It's not late, it's only..." I turned away from her, back toward the TV, and checked the time again. It was 10:28. "It's only 10:30. I finished. As I said the time, I turned my head again to look at her. She was completely gone. Vanished into thin air. I froze, all my hair standing on end. What? Where did she go? I wondered. I called her name and got no response. I blinked rapidly, wondering if this was a dream, trying to wake myself up. I told this story to a handful of people, and they all conjectured that maybe I had been asleep. While I have no way to prove to them I was wide awake at the time this happened, I know with absolute certainty I was awake. I turned off the TV but left the light on in the living room. No way was I shutting the light off, and ran into my eldest cousin's room, cowered under the covers, and waited for my aunt and uncle to get home. I didn't fall asleep until I heard them come through the front door many hours later. I didn't mention my experience to my aunt and uncle, or even my cousins, until many years later. They'd never had any strange experiences in the home, and they told me I must have been dreaming. I've had no history of delusions or mental illness. I know I didn't dream up seeing my aunt clear as day in the home and speaking to me when she wasn't there. I don't know what or who I saw that night, but it spooked me. I never did see that woman or thing again. My name is Brandy. I'm 56 and I live in Washington. All these years, my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my family. Quite a few members of my family have passed away, so I didn't want these experiences to die with them. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up supernatural things have happened to me and my family in my lifetime, most with witnesses, and this is one of them. About 25 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this run-down but livable house. She warned me not to rent this house because I have small children, and not only was it run down, it was very haunted. And never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you. He will be taken over by the evil that lives here. Now I'm thinking she is crazy or she was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home desperately. I was thinking that I have lived through worse, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house and realizing I should have heeded her warning. The whole house was old and made of wood. The walls, the doors, the ceiling, all wood, and there were French doors all along the front of the house. The main living space was long and open. The living room and dining area was all one room, and it was always cold. It was located in the high desert of California, on the corner of an acre lot of barren desert, and across the street was a grocery store and a few small shops too far for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m., and there was a 3-day trip to Disneyland planned. My kids, Michael age 1, Penny age 4, and Ginny age 3. We're all sleeping on my bed in my bedroom at the other end of the house, so I could pack up for the trip in the dining room and not wake them. But I could see the bedroom door, and it was closed. I was standing up folding clothes for the trip at the dining table. My mother-in-law, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Ginny in her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Ginny, now you know it's too early. Go back to bed." And she said, "Me up now, Mommy," in her little sweet voice. It made us both chuckle, and I said to Opal, "She's just excited." "No, baby, we're not going now. Please go back to bed." She stomped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. My mother-in-law said, "You better go put her back to bed." And I agreed. As I'm making that long walk towards her, I am keeping eye contact. As I'm walking, I say, "No, baby." And once again, she stomps her foot, smiles, and says, "Me up." With the sweetest smile, she tilts her head. Opal even muttered "ah." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect her little pigtails were. At this point, I am extending my hands towards her, but that smile, though, I got about 6 inches from touching her, and she turns black and disappeared almost like sand falling to the ground, and the door quickly closing behind her. My mother-in-law let out a surprised response, and I was in shock. I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear came all over my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing for the worst, only to find my little Ginny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. It couldn't have been her. We went on our trip, but when we came home, we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loud. People were standing around, 2 separate groups like 2 different periods of time. I turned to my husband and asked if he left the door unlocked and the lights on, and he said no. We all got out of the car and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierced my soul even now thinking about him. The kids were scared and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my key in. At that point, the music stopped and the lights went out. We opened the door and nothing. Nothing had been moved and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy I saw standing there out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. The kids and I were out grocery shopping having a good time. I usually keep the living room light on when I knew we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize we would be gone that long. It was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate, and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious. I sat for a moment, planning my attack while getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby, and the two girls up the steps and into the house when I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. "Stop!" I yelled, and ran over to them. We could hear noises like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says she saw a little boy and described him to a T, but at that moment I thought it might be an intruder or something. 3 steps went up to a landing, the locked front door opening into a window screened-in porch, then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them clutching the back of my shirt, I armed myself with a stick by landing and forging through. Wham! I burst through the front door to the porch, and he was there. His face with his 2 hands cupped against the glass as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. We went inside, and I searched every room with my obviously freaked out girls practically attached to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me? And was I projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran out to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries when I stopped in my tracks. There in the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints and was fogged up where his nose was. It stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Let me add my thoughts here. I don't feel we always need words to communicate with them or for them to get a message to us. They are not bound by flesh. You just have to be open and always keep your will strong. Anyway, at night, you could look out the French doors at the stores across the street and the desert field. The property was pitch black, so you could see the reflection of whatever was behind you. That night, everyone was asleep. It was near Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards skipping up next to me. I felt a tug on my shirt. I turned my gaze to the reflection and extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull him next to me. It didn't hit me. This wasn't my child. He came in under my arm next to me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. I looked back to his reflection, and it was gone as well. He was about 8 or 9 years old. He had what looked like black and white Converses on. He was wearing old jeans with rolled-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and whisked to the side with the sweetest smile. In that moment I felt everything, and I cried. I saw images of abuse I do not want to elaborate on, and he made me feel that the man was not his father and that he loved the comfort of our presence. So many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions like, what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. A person could live and die and no one would know unless it was reported. I felt whatever else that was in the house was evil, and we found out how evil the longer we lived there. I feel I should describe the bedroom so you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room there was a full-size bed against the wall where I slept, a small nightstand with a lamp, and a single bed next to me against the other wall where my 2 little girls slept. And then the living room door. At our feet was the hall door, a closet, and a crib. Many nights we would see the light beneath the door get blocked out as if though someone was walking up to my room and just stand there and then fade away. At first we thought it was my mother-in-law going to the bathroom since it was next to our room, but we found out later it wasn't her, and the dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall there was no one out there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m. we would hear the lid of the toilet slam up, and the toilet would flush, but when we ran in there the lid was down and the water was calm. A phone would start ringing in my room, despite us not even having one at the time, and we could hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first I thought it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something, but we didn't have any. The lady had already moved out and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day. They both received a package from my mom full of princess stuff, toys, cups and bowls, 2 beach towels and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess image. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. My mother-in-law was with family along with my husband. I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't there. I tucked them in, oldest by the wall and the youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I put a scarf over the lamp to dim the light so I could still read. Now I'm sitting on my bed next to them, and as I'm reading, the covers slightly come down off of the girls. I didn't think anything of this because my older daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I tucked them both in and continued my reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them up. At this point, I am feeling uneasy, and the hairs on my arms are starting to rise. Never a good thing. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. How was this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read, intently staring at the covers over the book pages. Moments passed and felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady. Then it happened. I saw the covers start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point, I am standing next to them, and my voice quivered as I firmly said, "Stay away from my girls." I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight when they were jerked from my hands down to the floor of the bed, exposing my girl's legs, and my youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise, and she started to scream as she was feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over both of my girls and screamed, "Get out! Leave us alone!" Repeatedly, I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. That was the last time they slept alone in that house. I was able to get a bigger bed, and we all slept together from that point on. I don't have photographic evidence, but my youngest daughter had large red marks on her thigh. I bet you're wondering, why didn't we just leave? Believe me, I wanted to. I felt trapped, not just by the house, but by my husband. Let me start by saying that my husband was not the nicest man. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young, but I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I loved. So that's why I didn't leave him, but this was different. This was not him. This was a whole other evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer we lived there. We stopped going out as a family, and he stopped working. He put bars on the window and locks on the doors. Living there changed him. The things he started to do were out of his character that made me uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, I felt it even more intense. One such night, the kids were at my mother's, and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch watching TV. I was mending a sock, and it had been a pretty good day. I noticed a change in the atmosphere, and for some reason he seemed to have gone quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to change the channel when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized he was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes. Those eyes weren't his. I know him. This is not my person sitting next to me, and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize I saw this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I said I'm going to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should just come back and sit down next to him and not call my mom. It didn't like her. I noticed that while he was talking, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost like he was looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him I was only going to be a minute. We stayed on the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a bit longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as I did at the time. He got up and went to sleep in the bedroom, so I stayed awake with the blanket, covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep on the couch. There was another time at about 4:30 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. My mother-in-law was napping at the dining room table, and my husband was sitting on the edge of our bed. I yelled out to him that I was leaving, to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself. I heard him mutter, "Yeah," so we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to the two stores. It had just gotten dark, and as we pulled up, I could hear the baby crying. I rushed in, and his mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son, and he was soaking wet. It looked like he'd been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, calming him down, and the whole time my mother-in-law was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious, and I told her, "I didn't. I left him with your son." She looked surprised. She didn't even know he was home. What? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to play with him. Something was off. I didn't think he was in the bedroom because the lights were out, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. There was a dim light coming in through a crack in the blinds, and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. He hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor, and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy and thick like sweat. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again, I called his name, adding, "You're scaring me." I moved closer, saying, "Why aren't you answering me?" I saw that he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dripped to the floor. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp, and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. There was a pool of sweat at his feet, and his eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them. His stare was fixated down towards the floor. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but I wanted to run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands, and with a quiver in my voice, I said, "Please." Just like that, he snapped out of it. He grabbed both my wrists and hurled me onto the bed behind him. He said with a loud voice, "What are you doing, freak?" and then got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I laid there curled up, not knowing what just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring the groceries in and make dinner. Later, he joined us as if nothing ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on, and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went to the kitchen to wash the dishes with my back to the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that he was gone. He came back later that next morning dirty and saying something about him getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next and who was safe. I later left my husband because of those and other atrocities he put me through while living there, borderlining on abuse rather than paranormal. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, clawing his way up my legs, closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. I still shiver when I see small mirrors or broken glass. A few years later, I ran into the former renter, so I asked her if she knew anything about a little boy ever living there, or did someone die, and she said she heard that there was a boy, and that his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad who was abusive to him. Later, the boy was found stuffed in a hole in the property dead, and the stepdad had taken his own life. I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty close to what I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped him move on. We couldn't even drive down that street after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and a housing tract was built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the evil within. So I worked at a warehouse, but instead of the heavy lifting and aisles of boxes everywhere, we have computers. My job is a desk job where we take documents from big companies and import them into a computer system so it's easier for the client to find what they're looking for. When I first started, things were great, and weird things would happen here and there, but was more coincidence than anything. One day I was working separate papers, and this big purple sign they had hung up randomly fell out of nowhere. Someone just picked it up and put it against the wall like nothing had happened, and we got back to work. But the longer I worked there, the more things I saw that you really couldn't put an answer to. I got close with one of the people working there, and she told me stories about the place that we had worked at. Apparently the first owner of that place sold it to whom we work for now. His mother told him if he sold the building, that she would haunt the place and terrorize the people that worked there. At this time, I was now working on a computer in an area where, when smoking was legal inside the workplace, people would go smoke in that area. They now put what shipments we get, and there are 2 vending machines for the employees. I had my headphones in and was listening to Let's Read Stories and saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I got curious and turned to see if someone was walking by. Next thing I know, I see an elderly woman staring at me with the worst look ever. I shot out of my chair and cursed, hopping up and down trying to catch my breath because, believe it or not, it scared me. The coworker I got close to was behind me and asked what was wrong. I told her what I saw, and she said, "Oh, that's the old owner's mother." I kind of laughed at this, and she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "No, I'm serious." I felt the color drain from my face, and I had to sit down. I've had experiences before, but never an elderly woman with a mean look staring at me and then disappearing. She then adds, "Oh, her husband is here too. He's in the dungeon area." So we called this back room where we stored boxes the dungeon because it was a very creepy room. I've seen stuff out of the corner of my eye when I was close to that area, but brushed it off. Well, I had now seen the woman and decided not to let that distract me from doing my job, and I'm guessing she didn't like that or the fact I cursed at her, so the big stack of folders I had by me kept getting knocked down, and the stickers we put on boxes kept falling on the ground off a desk and unraveling. The stickers I don't understand because where we had them, they were at the back of the desk, so something really had to push them or throw them across the desk to do something. I got frustrated one day because those things kept happening, and my friend said to apologize and she would stop. So I did, but she still messes with me here and there. I started noticing that I get anxious when she is around, so I hope I can grow in her like my coworker has and not have to worry about this mean old lady. Today, my yandere girlfriend had been taken away. I met this girlfriend in 7th grade. It all started when I was sitting at a table by myself because my friends ditched me, and the girlfriend came up to me and sat beside me and said hello. In a confused voice, girlfriend greeted me. The first thing I noticed was her voice. It sounded amazing, and we started a conversation and became friends. The next day I invited her to sit with my friends, and we got along well. Her and I started hanging out in private, and we enjoyed hanging out together. We even got in touch online, whether it was playing video games together or just texting. After a couple of months of this, she asked me out. I thought about it for a second and then accepted. How could I not? She was good looking, nice, and just perfect. I felt a little awkward about being taller and older, but it was my first girlfriend and I couldn't care less. We hung out together, had sleepovers, and did much more. It seemed like we were having the perfect time. I noticed she started getting more obsessive with me. She would want to spend every minute with me. Sometimes she wouldn't even allow me to hang out with my friends. Over time it got worse, and she threatened to hurt me if I didn't stay with her. And one day she snapped. I didn't answer my door when she came to my house, which was yesterday. She started texting me over and over, telling me how she was going to do ungodly things to me. I didn't take the text seriously, which was a big mistake. The next day, an hour after my parents left, she actually broke into my house. I wasn't expecting this, so I wasn't prepared. Once I heard glass breaking, I closed my room's door and hid in my closet, about to call 911. But then I heard the door open and I heard her say, "Why are you hiding from me?" I was frightened. Then I heard the closet door open. She saw me, got closer to me with a knife in her hand with an evil grin and bloodshot eyes. I started screaming, and then she pushed me to the ground and held me down with a knife against my throat. My friend heard the commotion and called the cops immediately. They would have not arrived till about 10 minutes after the girlfriend kept on saying stuff along the lines of, "Why don't you love me anymore?" or "It's so cute when you get scared." I asked her why she was doing this, and she just stared into my eyes with no emotion and an evil grin and started laughing. She started to rub the knife against my throat. I begged her to just leave me alone, and all she did was continue to grin and laugh. The police raided the house. Pointing their guns at her, they told her to put the weapon down. She complied, and I had so many questions. How could someone so innocent looking and young do this? Why is she doing this? After she was taken away by the cops, they questioned me for a while. I couldn't answer most of their questions because I didn't have the answers. I'm still traumatized from all of this. I'm scared of dating anyone, scared of being left alone. I'm going insane day by day. I have nightmares of the incident. I have flashbacks. All I can say is be careful who you date. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and eat my spoop soup.